Welcome to the Meta, Season 25, mid-season. Welcome back. This time I have my camera again. I'm done with traveling. So let's dig in. This is going to be a long, well, as usual, I guess, a long episode. This has been an incredible season so far. But first, let's go in a little bit and talk about who I am and what the show is about. So if this is the first time you're watching, this is looking at the state of the competitive GAC meta once or twice a season. So far it's been twice a season, sort of at the middle and the end, after week 2 and then after week 4. Sort of my thoughts on how it's going, what's happening, what's changing, plus, minuses, etc. Who am I? I'm almost 10 million actually currently. All these new characters have definitely boosted my GP. And yeah, skill rating in the top 50, it just depends on whether it's with the squish or not. Top 50 or top 100, I guess, depending on whether I'm on holiday or have time to focus on GAC, like most other people. Most importantly, though, I watch a ton of GAC content. I follow a huge amount of content creators, and I love learning from other people. For me, that works out great. I try and share that via like Grand Arena Science and having all the videos listed there for people to search. That's mostly the reason why I watch so many, and also stuff like this. Anyway, I think the whole meta is better when everybody is more informed and helping to develop it and change it. So what's happening right now? It's a huge change, just these first 2 weeks compared to the last season. I think what's becoming more and more not obvious, but more and more accessible to many players is the Starkiller Omicrons, and the fact that those allow the teams that they support to beat, or sometimes in some cases enable the team, like Mara Jade, for instance, enabling Starkiller to beat a wide variety of different teams on defense. So it's partially, I mean, as always, modding and just the teams you have available is important, but now there are so many options for beating other teams on defense, so many offensive options, that oftentimes it's more a matter of what you know rather than do you have the characters. Like the most common problem that I see is actually, or the most common reason for failure is players actually just not choosing a good team that they have very visible and accessible in their roster. Anyway, I think part of this shift that we're seeing is, at least in the top ends or in the competitive area, let's say the top end of Kyber 1, probably. I'll finish this thought after I say the next part here. It's a shrinking in defensive focused players. Not a shrinking, but they're definitely taken out of the top ends of competition. However, this is really on the top of Kyber 1, like I was just saying, because these defensive players will be dropped down into Kyber 2 or Kyber 3 or whatever. Players who don't spend a lot of time on offense and just place a really strong defense. Those players, those defensive heavy rosters, will be fought by more aggressive, offensive-minded, GAC-focused players, and they're going to have a difficult time in many cases beating these defensive heavy rosters if their roster doesn't quite match up. However, because of the wide variety of options we have, I don't even like calling it off meta, because many of these non-GL counters are very meta and in some cases better than an actual GL counter to the team in terms of banners and success rate and stuff. So they are sort of, the defensive focused players are losing, they're dropping down lower and lower, I guess you could say. Their stability point in terms of positioning is lower and lower. I'm just going to play this video in the background so you have something to watch while you're listening to me talk, until I have some data to show you. Yeah, an example of this is the new teams or units CG has introduced. Omicron is a great example. Omicron Wampa is meant for players who want to climb or want to succeed at Grand Arena. For somebody to just Omicron Wampa on defense does nothing. I mean, he's okay character, but like you don't get any of the bonuses you get at the start of battle when you're using him solo against either a whole team or a single unit. So this is a good example of how there are more offensive options, more flexible offensive options than there are strong defensive teams. So it gives more of a rise of this concept that to succeed, you have things sort of stacked in your favor when you're focused on a strong defense rather than just building a crazy strong, or excuse me, when you're focused on a strong offense rather than building a crazy strong defense. He does have weaknesses, of course, but like it's also interesting talking about Wampa again here. Interesting if you think of how it changes the strategies for good players. So if you're trying to beat somebody who's the same skill level as you can assume they're spending sort of the same amount of time as you scouting and preparation and all of that stuff. And so generally, whatever time you put in, you're going to meet players that are doing the same thing, and you'll make the same mistakes and have the same errors and succeed at the same type of things. But if you're trying to beat players that are better than you, by better, that could mean they have a bigger roster. It could mean they need to spend a lot more time scouting and preparing and planning. Maybe their mods are just amazing. Sometimes 2 of these or even 3 of these at the very top end go together. But for players who are trying hard to beat you, Wampa adds a very complicated set of decisions to their defensive setup, because they have to expect that one of their teams will be killed for 68 points. So, and the thing with Wampa is there's no other place he fits in your roster. Like the vast majority of other characters need, usually at a minimum, 4 other characters to make them really good and really strong. GL sort of being the exception. But a slight exception. But no other character has been made specifically to be used solo with no defensive purpose. Like you can only use him on your offensive roster. So for players to set a good defense against it, especially when they know that when they're taking the time to scout you, like they're trying to do well, it's a very complicated puzzle to try and solve. Like, do you put a team to take the Wampa and then you put other teams in the back that they won't be able to Wampa? But if you do that, that's sort of a lot of weak teams. Anyway, it's fascinating. It makes it much more, in the end of the day, it makes it much more complicated for defensive-focused players because there are just so many offensive tools available, and more. And yeah, going to the next point here is the Executor fleet changes. I really don't, it depends on where you are in the fleet meta in general. Roster-wise, like, do you have an Executor? This is primarily talking about people with Executors. And did you whale a little bit? Doesn't really have to be a lot. I think you could do it just with refreshes, but quite a few people paid a couple thousand crystals to get some refreshes to make sure that their echelon was 5 stars. Because right now, even a 5-star echelon can beat, I don't know about with more reliability than a fully, high relic malevolence fleet, can beat an Executor. But a 7-star echelon who has highly relic pilots can beat Executor very reliably, much more than a malevolence. And almost no matter what, a 5-star echelon can kill one character and make for a very easy cleanup against the Executor fleets. So many people are taking their Executors off defense. I think that's fantastic. That's something I've been a proponent of for a long time, and it would be nice to take credit for that. I know that's not the case, and it's not even just the echelon. It's the fact that during the last update, there was an AI change introduced for the Executor. So the Executor no longer uses its heal and only targets Houndstooth. They'll target usually the weakest other ally. And so this totally changes the mirror matches The stall out mirror match doesn't work quite as well for Executor. And it also changes the malevolence counters because you have to really time your attacks pretty well if you want to win. You can still win, of course, but it definitely makes it more complicated. Yeah, so it sort of, the ship meta, we'll talk about ships in a little bit here later. But the ship meta is quite interesting because now, if you assume that you're going to keep your Executor for offense, and your opponent will do the same, you're going to place one other ship on defense, or two other ships on defense, sorry. One of them will be beaten by the Executor, the most difficult one, I guess. And the Executor can kill anything easily, probably on auto. And then the third, the other ship you have to place on defense, or the other fleet you have to place on defense. There is a fascinating sort of shuffle there of which ships you put on defense, which ones you keep to beat the other fleet that your opponent puts on defense. That's amazing. I'll go over it in more details in the fleet section, but it's sort of how I think it plays out now is what beats the malevolence for the most banners. I think that's what it comes down to. But let's go into that more in the ship section. Let's continue on the meta in general. Perfect example is ships. When you're building your roster, if you want your finalizer fleet, the echelon, to do well against Executor, you need to have a highly relic set of pilots. Now this is really only at the top end, like probably the top few hundred players or a few thousand players or something like that, who have 7-star echelons and who have the materials to like Relic 5, 7, Relic 7 really, or Relic 6 Hux. And then for sort of officer for echelon, Relic 7, Relic 8, you sort of need that to avoid, probably Relic 8 to be honest, you need it to avoid the double tap by Xanadu Blood that can still kill your echelon on the opening salvo. Anyway, all of that, the whole idea there is how and what do you prioritize when you're building your roster, when you're developing your roster, when you're choosing what to focus on with your resources. Do you do it for mods? Do you do it for certain teams, certain characters, certain counters? You just focus on like perfecting a certain counter. I think this is something where I see people making really, really poor choices frequently. And you can see it when they're using a particular counter in the GAC footage I watched. Like I could probably guess with 70 to 80% accuracy when they choose to take in a certain team and they see like 3 Relic Zeros, or some characters are not even relic yet, some important characters like the Sith Triumvirate or something like that. I could guess at the reasons why they don't have that relic or developed, and that usually has to do with the reasons why they're relicking your other characters. So an example would be like, an easy one, I guess, is because my guild requires it for TW. Very fair point. I mean, I'm not saying any of these are bad or wrong reasons. I just think from a GAC perspective, they're oftentimes not thought through on how they impact your plan, what your goal is with your roster, how your playstyle is. Another reason is because the person who beat them last had this amazing team. They're like, oh, well, shit, I really want that team. Or that character is a lot more powerful than I thought. So they build up that character. And then you have other players who look at it as, and I think this is a much more appropriate way, or not appropriate, but more effective way. Effective is a better way to put it. There's many different ways to play. No one is right or wrong. I'm just talking about if you want to succeed at Grand Arena and succeed above your peers, people with similar rosters or similar skill rating, really. Although skill rating is part of roster, a little bit of luck, Omicron or not Omicron, that plays a huge role in some matches. So think about how your roster changes are going to impact your plan. Like, so actually, I'm going down here to the next point using Omicron. So for Wampa, sorry, I'm saying Wampa and Omicron at the same time. For Wampa, as I mentioned, he's only good on offense. I mean, that's why you put an Omicron on him, so you can put him on offense. And this is good for players who want to be good at Grand Arena, as a general statement. If you're just a player who sets a bunch of stuff on defense and doesn't really care, of course, Wampa's great, but you're not making that much use out of his very unique position in the meta. It also benefits players who really want a strong offensive showing and aim for a lot of banners. So Wampa's great. Like, your opponents will have to try and set teams that can't be Wampa'd, which makes them vulnerable to other things. So Wampa is fantastic, and he generally will get a lot of banners. Or if you make a mistake, he can clean up virtually anything. And for the defensive heavy players who plan on two-shotting, like their strategy involves two-shotting half of their opponent's teams, all the GLs their opponent may place on defense. Wampa's fantastic for that. I mean, he can solo Sith Eternal, many of the comps, not all. But he can also, solo individual teams if your opponent puts some weaker teams there. But what I'm saying is Wampa is a choice that is very easy to make for players who care about performing well. But you have to be focused on an offensive plan. Compare that to Qui-Gon Jun. So at the beginning, people loved to, or chose his Omicron. Well, he was like one of the first ones. But also because he put up some huge numbers. And in a similar way to Wampa, you could just throw him in and he'd perform well. He also didn't have a lot of challenging character requirements, unit requirements. So he wasn't stealing away from like your best team or something like that. But after the change, what his current state is, he takes a lot more thought, in my opinion, on whether you actually want to invest in him or not. So if you're a defensive focused player and you put him on defense, almost certainly he's going to be beat for 65 banners by Bad Batch. Like that's one thing I wanted to show here. If we look at, so this is in season 23, right at the format changes. There were 7,000 battles with Qui-Gon Jun. Of course, not all of these had Omicron. And the Bad Batch teams were winning 70, 80% at the beginning before people really knew what this was like. This is the first season where Qui-Gon Jun was there. 7,000 battles. Here we have 2 seasons later, and this is season 25, which doesn't even have the all of the matches yet. So it's probably going to end up being 8,000, something like that, 9,000 maybe. There are a lot more people with the Omicron. So there's a lot more matches happening, but look at the win rates. 90, 90, 85, 82, 85. Well, gas is in there for 82. Don't use CLS. But you can see that as the team becomes more understood, and of course he doesn't have the huge offensive boost that he did at the beginning, most of the time he's just killed by this one team. So he's not that great on defense. For players who are trying to focus on a particular playstyle, and that playstyle is defense, not a great choice. For players who are trying to do more on offense, I think on the other hand, he's actually getting more powerful or more flexible, well, especially with mace too. Be curious to see those stats. By this I mean, while specifically for Qui-Gon on offense, his main advantage is that he doesn't need a speed advantage to win with high banners, assuming he gets killed. But with many of the teams now that have such a heavy speed advantage, whether by mechanic, base speed, or ability. Zam, Iden, Kyle Katarn, the Ewoks, Starkiller, EP, Mary Jade. Qui-Gon can go in there, can take a huge amount of hits. Again, especially if you have a taunting tank in there. The character's not going to die, then you have a chance to recover, get back, and you stand a great chance to win because you have essentially unlimited lives. Of course, minus, annihilate and stuff like that. You have essentially unlimited lives, and if your leader does get killed, you have a huge bonus damage and a free turn in which you can finish off the fight. So it's a fascinating character in offense. Not great for banners most of the time. I mean, you can sort of cheese with Qui-Gon, Jedi, Anakin, and Ki-Adi-Mundi. You can sort of cheese high banners against some teams, but in general, that's not the most common usage. So he's actually quite good on offense if it fits in your playstyle, like if you're thinking about where you're going to use him. So that's something that I think many people don't do as much. Why are you getting a character? Just because? Or do you have a particular purpose or role in your roster that he's going to fit in? Does he fit with the other characters, the other units that you have? I think people don't think about this as much, or they don't think about it until afterwards, and they waste some relic levels on a character. So talking about rosters and units and everything, I mentioned this earlier, the most common way that I see people lose, and it's a huge commonality across players of every skill level and skill rating, is they don't choose the right team. The team is there. The data is there, but they just don't choose that team. They're in a rush, or they don't want to look at GG or Grand Arena Science or something like that. Like, it's shocking how many people lose a match just because they don't spend a couple minutes to talking about Bad Batch and Qui-Gon. That wasn't planned. Anyway, it's amazing how many people lose a match because they don't tend to spend a couple of minutes to look at the stats for that counter. It's not that difficult. Like, just go to Grand Arena Science, put in your teams, Qui-Gon with Jedi Knight Anakin, General. Let's say you know how to do the counter. You don't want to see any of the videos or anything like that. Just click on the meta report and it opens straight up to GG with those characters pre-selected. I mean, a lot of people should be doing that and save themselves some heartache. That's my opinion. Again, most of the stuff in Grand Arena Science is because I wanted to make my life easier. So anyway, yeah, I think people are losing because they choose the wrong team. A lot of people lose because they choose the wrong team. Sometimes they choose a risky team that they know is the best option they have. Of course, that's normal. Or they just make a mistake and misplay something. It happens to everybody. But so many people lose. By far, the most common thing I see people losing fights for is just choosing the wrong team when they have other teams available. It's crazy. So let's talk about strategy here. In terms of playstyles, this is the playstyle aspect. We'll go to teams later. So as your roster changes, and rosters are changing dramatically now with all the Omicrons available, new marquee characters, reworks to older characters, huge amount of roster changes are going on, and people don't tend to adjust very quickly or thoughtfully. Like, they don't spend time to think or to do some research on YouTube or ask in their guild Discord or a GAC-focused Discord. There's lots of those. They don't try and figure it out. They just throw it in somewhere, which is sort of understandable given the fact that they may not have a lot of time. But I think this is a place that can be improved on by many players, myself included, by the way. I'm far from perfect in that or any respect. Another thing I see a lot of, this is more I see comments about when I'm watching videos. A lot of people say, oh, well, I would have loved to use this in the counter, but he's not modded correctly. That is so common. I think it's part two reasons, sort of. One is that in the past, many counters were mod dependent. Quite a few still are, but far less than before. So people still have the mentality that if the modding isn't done just right, they're not going to win. And the second thing is there are so many new characters that people will remod for a particular character in a team, but then the rest of their, throws off the rest of their modding. Very complicated. Luckily though, I think because there are so many more counters that are not mod dependent or very less mod dependent, you have a lot of freedom in what you choose. It's more really about the team that you choose, the one that fits the best, and just knowing where to get that information. So playstyles. Yeah, I sort of jumped the gun. Why do you build your roster? So in the past, before the format changes, most of the high-ranking players would win for high banners. That was really all that mattered. Because the matchmaking, and you had to get some luck on matchmaking, but you didn't match up against players with similar roster sizes, just like the top end. And even then it was RNG-ish. There's a bunch of variables that we don't really know all of them. So it's still important, obviously, especially against players of equal skill and playstyle to your own. If it's a different playstyle, it sort of throws off the numbers a little, or throws off the calculation a bit, but if it's the same playstyle as you, whether it's defense or offense or whatever, banners matter a great deal. But yeah, like I was saying, the knowledge of the counters is so much more important, I feel, these days than it is ever before. And that knowledge is not hard to find. Like GG is there for a reason. It's a fantastic database. And there's many tools that work with it or help it or stuff that provide additional information besides just the numbers, like knowing how to play a counter or just getting some custom information. It's incredible. And talking about that, actually, yeah. So I wanted to look at some of the high skill players, not necessarily skill rating, although that will play a role too, but people who do really well at GAC, and look at how their playstyle is. What are they doing for their offensive choices? What are their counters? So the first one we'll look at here is Hawkeye, who is currently, and has been for a while, the #1 ranked player on the GAC leaderboard. What's he doing for offense? So obviously he one-shot everything, and this other guy didn't try at all. That's funny. Are they in the same guild? Who knows what's happened there? But anyway, so uses Starkiller for not great banners, but against a standard Ray team. JML 61. He chose Dash against Iden, but Dash with a pre-taunt. And Vandor probably got unlucky with Death Trooper. I don't know if his Dash has an Omicron, but look at this: the top-ranked player in the game still just quit out of it right away. Then he tried another Trooper's taunting. Okay, interesting. I've seen that work before, but given the relic levels, I can see why not. Still didn't kill Iden, so he took solo or gas and 5s in there to clean up Iden. Then you have some crap team. Yeah, this had to be some sort of win trading. Yeah, that's probably what it is. Okay, that's a terrible example then. So here he beat another player. Okay, different guild, good. What did he take? Let's see how he does. Again, keep in mind, this is the #1 ranked player in the game. So even if he has some win trading with guild members, I'm sure that happens in a lot of places, not just at his position. He still has to fight a lot of really, really good aggressive players. So he tried this Sith Eternal versus Kylo Ren. Sort of reliable. I would guess he didn't do speed correctly or health correctly, because if he does this setup, the armor has to go before Hux. and the Shore Trooper has to drop below 60% health. So I'm guessing Armor went first, but Shore Trooper didn't drop enough. Anyway, didn't work, so he quit. Then he took in this team, would have been even better at the first time for 64 banners. Easy to make these mistakes. That's an easy counter. That's an easy counter, high banners, easy counter, sort of mediocre banners. Man, why do people put Qui-Gon on defense? It baffles me. Without a team to draw Bad Batch. Amazing. Okay, he was faster, so he won. Grievous versus Mothma, crap banners. Any weird setups anywhere? No. What sort of nonsense team is this? Easy to beat. Easy to beat. With the two sisters under Boba. That's some weird ass team. Aura versus Django, yeah, easy. Traya versus Iden, easy. Kept his Executor for offense, kept his Negotiator for offense, 70 and 73, awesome. So you see where he gets his high points from, but even in this, he made some really strange choices and had some easy teams to beat. The #1 skilled player in the game. Let's see his third match against Peepo. Peepo's very good. I think Peepo's in Paw Patrol 2, yeah. So we might be seeing some funky things here. Rey versus Rey, pretty normal. That's a complicated match to do, by the way, but a good one. Good counter for good banners usually. SLKR versus Vader, yep. Surprised that he doesn't use Fennec against Vader. Again, faster Piet versus Dash. Bast versus Darth Maul and some nonsense, so yeah, that's easy. Starkiller versus GAC, don't see that very often. Oh, cool win. Troopers versus Mothma. Oh, with Shock in there, okay. Yeah, nice. Traya versus Iden. Traya Malik versus Iden, nice. Crap banners, but nice. JKR versus Django. Aura versus a really slow Darth Revan team. Oh, but is Zan in there? No, just a really slow Darth Revan team, okay. CLS versus Ewoks. Negotiator versus Malevolence. And, oh, this is another sort of waste of banners. You can just send in, yeah, you can just send in Jedi Master Luke Skywalker solo against the Night Sisters. They only have one source of TM removal there in Spirit, because it's a Mother Talzin version. You have a bunch of Health Steal. It's wasting a bunch of banners there. Anyway, interesting to look. Let's look at Fatal. So here in this match, Fatal is more of a defensive player. He's up against Sasha. Sasha's a fantastic player. One of the only players that's actually, I've lost plenty of matches, but Sasha, just a year ago maybe, right around the beginning of GAC, Sasha beat me very reliably. Like, he outthought me and outplayed me. Great, very nice guy, great player. Anyway, so Starkiller Rey, sure, GG against Starkiller, yeah. Of course, Trooper, I don't understand this. Crazy. Troopers versus Qui-Gon. So you see he went in here and timed out. So close. I'm guessing he went first, but just not enough. Dark Trooper, Piet. Oh, Gideon instead of Stark, so he's missing an AoE. That's probably why. Usually when you go against Dash, maybe his Piet was not fast enough, he needed Gideon. Usually when you go against Dash, you put in Stark, so you have a third AoE in addition to Dark and Veers. Slower, a lower cooldown than Veers too. Night Sisters fail, and they got healed back up. Finally, the Traya trio, and he beat it that way. Yeah, definitely the best banner option against even full Relic 8 Dash teams is the Traya trio. That's usually good for like 65, 66 banners. Look at Wampa go. Relic 7 KK, nice. Easy. C, yep, that's easy 69. Should always be 69. Okay, tried Qui-Gon, didn't work. Yeah, that's sort of, you can be unlucky there with Death Trooper skill delaying Jedi Knight Anakin. So when Qui-Gon dies, he only has his basic available. The basic is not going to kill Stormtrooper. Doesn't really work so well. Then kill it with JKR, yeah. But again, look at these choices. What I'm trying to say is, choices, even at the high performing level, you can easily make the wrong choices. And if you had thought through a little bit more, I'm not trying to cast shade on any of these players, okay? Please don't take that away from this conversation. It's just that it's easy to make the wrong choice. It's better to take a little bit of extra time, and it's extra complicated for streamers who really are sort of time limited to make choices. So no hard feelings to anybody, but it's amazing the even very good players just not making the correct or the best choice on a regular-ish basis. Eventually, I think the Maul team stopped him. Yeah, he couldn't get through Maul. And actually looking at Sasha, well, that was round 1. I don't want to go... Let's see how far, 36 minutes. Damn. Look, here's the guy who... Well, maybe he wasn't win trading with Hawkeyes, because here he didn't do... Oh, Fatal didn't do anything. And AME killed him normally. Yeah, okay, I take back that stuff. Nat Geo Hunter. Failure against Rey. Failure against Lord Vader. Relegate Wampa against a strong. Oh, that is cool. His full Relic 7 item team. Very, very cool. That's awesome. GG Qui-Gon Jun. Huh, interesting. Fatal definitely has creative teams that he uses on offense. Another failure. And he took in Stark this time too. Interesting. Oh, but Vet Han is there, or Vet Smuggler Han is there. That's a Relic 8 Vandor. And Zal and L3. The last one was not 2 taunts. Kira was in there. Interesting. Failed, timed out of this one. Finally, what did he take in there? Maul. Okay. 65 banners. Could have been 65 banners. Qui-Gon versus Ewoks. Yep. All right. Well, yeah, that was a good battle. Did he save his? Oh, he one-shot the Executor. Cool. Anyway, I was also going to look at Sasha's team, Skelterix, Arnold, but I don't really want to spend. You can all do that yourself. The point that I wanted to make was, if we look at how they're playing, the focus on having a flexible amount of teams for offense is definitely there. Look at some of the crazy choices they made. Fascinating choices, and they tend to know their rosters well. And it is it's very important to know what your roster can do when you're facing somebody, to not make the wrong choice in terms of selecting teams, because all of them made mistakes in selecting teams. There's very few of those matches where, well, of course everybody can make a misplay, and maybe that's the reason for some of the failures, but some of them you can see just by looking at the team composition. How do you really expect it to win? I mean, like, from a stats perspective, it doesn't work out. And these are just, they make the wrong choices. I do the same thing. Everybody does. So keep that in mind when you're planning your roster. How do the individual units fit into your roster? What are you going to use them for? And don't rush to select a team when you're trying to beat something. Better to take a couple extra minutes. 40 minutes, all right. So here's the roster, the playstyles that I talked about. You can read that later. Playstyles sort of being developed. These are mostly similar to last season. The flexibility is the biggest one. Oh yeah, Qui-Gon Jinn and Iden. That's what I was showing you here. Qui-Gon Jinn. Look at Iden. This is crazy. Season 24, 10,000. Season 25, 10,000 in the first like 2 weeks. So many more people have Iden. Iden is actually getting moved a lot more to offense now that Wampa is down there. There's just 1 week of data though. That like the Beskar Mando counter is there, that the Bad Batch counter with Padme or without Padme is there, that Bad Batch with Shaq is there. There's a lot of counters to Iden now compared to when she first came out. So people are shifting her more and more to offense because she can kill a bunch of stuff on offense as well. Don't knowledge overload yourself during the scouting stage. Always great to spend a few minutes there, but it's more during the actual fight what teams your opponent put on defense and what you're going to use to beat them. And flexible is the most important thing, in my opinion. Okay, well, this is going to be a long episode. I hope you're ready. So, fleet meta. Executor on offense, more and more common. This is, as I mentioned before, because of the AI changes in the TIE echelon. The interesting thing, though, is, well, let's talk about this little mishmash, the shuffle, the echelon shuffle, as I call it. One thing to keep in mind for the finalizer fleet, it's very gear reliant. If you want to stand a good chance at beating the Executor, like reliably, you need high relic pilots. And that's very difficult. So you need 7-star Executor or 7-star echelon and high relic pilots. This difficult and limits the options you have. I've seen some interesting stuff with 7-star echelons on defense. I don't know that I'm sold, but it's very interesting. Okay, so these last two things I'll talk about after I talk about this whole shuffle. I mentioned briefly this concept before. Right now, let's say you keep your Executor on offense, because most likely if you put it on defense, it is not complicated to beat it with a mirror for 70 plus points. And that's great banners no matter what fleet you're using. So that means you're going to put 2 other fleets on defense. Just let's make the assumption. So Negotiator is a great fleet on defense. Great on offense too for banners, but great on defense. And Malevolence is shit for banners on offense, but you can beat it pretty easily for banners with only Negotiator, reliably for most people. So let's say you put Negotiator and Malevolence on defense. One of those will be killed with your opponent's Executor. Let's say he kills your Malevolence for 72 whatever banners. It's 74. You can get 74 against Malevolence. Yeah. Let's say that happens. So you're left with a Negotiator. So he's going to use his own. What's he going to use versus Negotiator? Well, Rebels are a very easy high banner when he gets Negotiator, unless they have the Imperial TIE Bomber. So in that case, what would they use? Well, actually, Echelon, Finalizer and Echelon do pretty good. Not for high banners, like mid-60s, or 66 to 68, I guess, for good banners with Echelon. So is there another option then? You could use Empire, actually. High Relic Empire can get 70 banners versus Negotiator, even with Imperial TIE Bomber. But if you want to use Empire Fleet, you need your own Imperial TIE Bomber, so you can't put yours on defense with your own Negotiator. So maybe you negotiate or you use Echelon all the time to kill whatever version of Negotiator they have. Or you keep Echelon, you can't actually. It's not super 100% reliable for good banners against the ETA2 and Ahsoka starting lineup. So you need probably Rebels and Echelon to hold for the Negotiator, which is not bad. And then you save your Executor for the Malevolence. Not bad. But it seems to come down to what are you going to use to kill Malevolence if they put some strange Negotiator setup? Because there's a lot of options you can throw in as a second and third reinforcement. Anyway, I think it's fascinating, the back and forth, and obviously it's hard to get all of those fleets at decent relic levels that you can depend on them. And many people don't have practice with them. And in Fleet, now depending on your Fleet chart, it's hard to get practice. There is this option I've seen a couple of times. The new Resistance tank against the Malevolence. Doesn't seem super reliable, but that's also, I think, most of the Star Fortress fights were like Relic 5 pilots, and relics make a big difference on the pilots. Is when you're fighting another fleet with max relic pilots. Interesting. So, moving on. We're at 45 minutes. My goodness, I talk a lot. What's going on? Yeah, so Iden is character-wise. Iden is sort of on the way out. I mean, she's still a fantastic defensive team. I place her on defense most of the time because it forces a certain subset of characters, or a certain subset of counters. So if you can also place teams that then need to be beat by those counters, fantastic. Or if you place Iden in view, you know that somebody's gonna, like if you place her on top, for instance, you know someone's going to keep a certain counter for her that they won't use at all against the bottom set of teams. But then if you place another team in back that draws one of the teams they may use as a replacement instead of that Iden counter against the bottom tier of teams, you can make some really interesting choices happen there. And I'm not even saying necessarily for holds, but just for banners. Malik, yeah, it's amazing seeing how Sith Eternal Empire is just rocketing up in defensive holds. Crazy. It's really nice to see how well he's doing. And also because now the most common DR counter has Nest in it, and if you have Nest, you don't need Malik, so you can throw Malik someplace else. Basically because neither Nest will prevent trooper counters, Malik does not prevent trooper counters. So you can throw Malik someplace else where he's more useful, because the teams that are going to counter DR with Nest in it don't really care about Malik. It doesn't stop them or change them. So he's sort of a waste. That's why he's like a free floating character now. Lots of interesting places to see him. And this Fennec counter to Lord Vader. Such cheap, high effectiveness, reliable counter. I don't know why people put Lord Vader on defense. He's amazing on offense. He can solo SEE teams, pretty much all of them. Can solo equal or low relic SLKR teams if he's modded with a lot of protection stuff. Pretty easy. Can solo Iden teams, any Iden team he can solo on auto, I think. Most of mine are just half auto. And tons of other B teams. Like, he's so powerful. He's one of the best solo characters for banners that there are. Similar to Wampa, we talked quite a bit about him earlier. By far from perfect, I mean, you have to be very careful. Don't make a mistake. Again, this is the whole thinking. Thinking is important. FYI. But I make plenty of mistakes involving not thinking. But don't use Wampa where they have tenacity down, ability block, stun, especially unresistible stuns like Kylo Ren Unmasked, or all those Krennic leads, you see. Anyway, Wampa's great, but easy to beat or easy to lose with if you don't choose your counters carefully. And yeah, just like I've mentioned ever since Omicrons came out, choose them carefully to fit your playstyle and your roster. Don't just choose it because it's cool. So, what's in the future? What's coming up next? One of the coolest things, I think, is the things they announced in the road ahead. Let's go back to this little video. You can be entertained while I talk. The road ahead, where you can unlock and lock your roster throughout the join period of GAC. Amazing. How long have you been asking for this? That'll be fantastic. Fantastic. And yeah, we now have a real ship meta. A real ship meta, perhaps? It's actually pretty good, the ship meta, in GAC, not in Arena. We still are missing some way to modify ship stats besides pilot relic levels. Like, it feels like we're back in the the Middle Ages at the beginning of the character meta, where there was, or beginning of character growth in the game, where there were no mods. You always were relying on just the character stats to determine it. It was terrible. It's the same thing we have now in Fleet. It's really horrible. There needs to be some way to have ship stats modified. 7-star mods or some new gear or something. Who knows? But that's the worst part of ships. Starkiller. This is not planned. We're watching Starkiller on screen. But Starkiller is, I think, potentially the best GL. Hard to say. JMK is probably best. But in terms of strategic complexity, he's amazing. First of all, he can 60 any team he's faster than, and he is able to go faster than anything other than GLs. Well, the EP Marj version. So if he goes first, you'll get, well, not 60, 65, sorry, you'll get max banners, which is fantastic. Unless you damage them too fast and somehow they have counterattacks or something. Also, he can kill at least half of the GLs, more depending on your team comp and familiarity and stuff like that. Amazing. And he's relatively accessible compared to actually getting all the GL requirements, unlocking the GL, getting the ult, etc., etc. Amazing character. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this incredibly long video is Inquisitorious Faction. What are they good for? Where are we going to use them? We know that the Grand Inquisitor is coming. We also know that they're going to have a couple more, 1 or 2 more beyond that. But still, what is their expected power level? Where are they going to fit in the meta? So looking at them so far, some of the characters like the Ninth Sister, not bad, tanky, beefy. The Seventh Sister, whatever, I don't even remember all the sisters. The new one, the healer one, some flexibility. The other one is the pilot of a good ship for the Empire fleet. But really, those are all little bits and pieces. Is it going to be like Bad Batch, where the Grand Inquisitor comes and suddenly, wow, it's amazing? That's only still 4 characters. But yeah, really hard to say. What I find interesting, though, is all 3 of the Inquisitors have a TW Omicron. They haven't announced a new GL. We don't know what the next power tier is. They sort of gave us 2 very strong characters that fit into a variety of teams, but were meant sort of for one team in Boba Fett Scion and Starkiller, one for GAC and one for TW. Now I'm wondering, just purely speculation, for all of these territory, the 3 so far have territory war Omicrons. What if the Grand Inquisitor had a territory war Omicron as well, but somehow it worked in a way that if all the units on his team had a Omicron, their territory war Omicron as well, this would be a unit that would be more powerful than the rest of the GLs, or some new heightened power level. I just think it's very interesting. All 3 of them so far have a territory war Omicron, and they're obviously missing a leader and something to make them stand out. Interesting. And if that's the case, does that mean we'll get one for GAC afterwards, like the next faction they announce? Will that be the GAC faction? It's very interesting. It makes me really want to hold on to my Omicrons until we see what's going on. And it makes me wonder about, it's just strange that all 3 have TW Omicrons. Not quite sure what that means. Anyway, it's fun to speculate. So much is going on in GAC these days, even though the Inquisitors are not really playing a big role there. I love the ship changes. This flexible roster lock in the future is going to be awesome between the end of this season, season 25, and the beginning of season 26. Awesome. I hope you guys are having a good time. I hope you found this very, 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 very long video interesting at some level. And I hope you have good luck in GAC. Cheers.